Hello, and welcome to Xtalks Spotlight, illuminating insights from subject matter experts and industry thought leaders. I'm Sonia Hunt. In this episode, we're asking the question, what are the top oncology clinical trial trends as seen through the lens of ESMO? With more, here's Vera Kovacevic.
Thanks, Sonia. Oncology is recognized as having the largest drug pipeline of any therapeutic area. Estimates based on publicly available information suggest more than 40% of all new therapies in development are cancer treatments. Given this hotbed of activity, innovation in the space to drive faster decisions and more efficient trials must be intense. That said, there are many aspects of oncology drug development that are driven by the unique nature of the treatments being developed and the needs of the patients, their caregivers, and the doctors that treat them. Recent advances in trial models that allow more patient-centric trial designs have gotten a lot of attention, particularly since the start of the pandemic. But other less obvious changes are happening behind the scenes. Changes in what data is used to inform the trial design and site selection, new approaches to patient recruitment, and the rise of advanced treatments such as cell and gene therapy are rewriting the script. Large oncology conferences such as the one organized by the European Society for Medical Oncology, or ESMO, which took place in October, are some of the best places to keep a finger on the pulse of these innovations. In this Xtalks Spotlight edition, we're delighted to have Dr. Ken Morrison, Global Head of Strategic Delivery and Growth Oncology at Fortrea. Dr. Morrison has over 30 years of oncology preclinical and clinical experience between academia and the industry sector in pharma and CROs. We're also delighted to have Dr. Laura Vidal, Medical Head of the Oncology Group in the EU at Fortrea. Dr. Vidal is a certified medical oncologist with extensive experience in oncology drug development. Ken and Laura join us today to share their insights from the ESMO conference that was held in Madrid this year. They will discuss some of the top new trends in oncology trial design that sponsors are either incorporating into clinical trials or need to start planning to include. Thank you for taking the time in the Spotlight interview, Ken and Laura. To start us off, let's talk about some of the top trends that were discussed at ESMO this year.
Well, in my opinion, the huge quality of the work presented, some of the presentations in the presidential session were amazing, and they really presented positive results in some indications where until now the outcome was very poor, like bladder cancer or some non-small cell lung cancer with rare mutations. And secondly, it was very nice to see a lot of patients and advocacy groups involving in discussions with investigators, people like us, regulators, to be part of clinical trial designs. I think that is very positive, and it's going to help as well move forward the pathway for new drugs.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, I completely agree with you, Laura, about the expansive nature of the number of assets that are being developed, from targeted therapies, advanced ADCs, and cell and gene therapies. Actually, this is probably the first ESMO that I've certainly experienced where there's been such a breadth of discussion. And then the other element for me is also thinking about different types of data and how that's been applied in the clinical development space, so traditional clinical trials, but then other ways to actually support clinical data using real-world evidence.
Okay, so now what I'm wondering is, how do these trends and innovations impact trial design? And are we seeing incremental changes, or is there a revolution going on?
So I think for me, the link between the biology of cancer and the therapeutic interventions that are being developed has never been as fast moving. And so, understanding the cancer, the biology of a particular patient's cancer and aligning that with the most appropriate therapy was really very, very visible. Laura mentioned about non-small cell lung cancer. There was a number of presentations that talked about those specific patient populations, and therefore the type of trial design really needs to encompass how you select out those particular patients in a basket study or an umbrella study. And actually the vast majority of presentations were really focused on those areas, taking a study from, first in patient all the way through to registration, and identifying patients who are really rare in the same trial. So Laura, I'm sure you've got additional thoughts and comments around that.
Definitely. I think that we're seeing like a change in how we design studies based on biology. So we come from really large studies to small, more segment studies, only focus on those patients with specific markers. But on top of that, I think as well that we are as well applying best knowledge from, for instance, cell gene therapy that we have seen in hematological tumors to solid tumors. And I think that we have seen quite a lot as well at ESMO, and in the future, I'm pretty sure that we will see some breakthroughs on that regard. And finally, and we've been discussing that, Ken, quite at ESMO, is about the importance of the voice of the patient in how they are involved in helping to design the studies for better understanding what are the outcomes that are important for them, which are these quality of life topics that they are interested in, and to see as well if these studies that we plan have meaningful answers for them. So I think that having as well patients, caregivers, and all these patient advocacy groups at ESMO, there was a lot of presence and discussions, is something that it's changing the way we develop drugs.
So Ken and Laura, as you know, for trials to be successful, there must be a strong partnership between the sponsors driving the trials, the vendors such as the CROs that actually manage the trial execution, and the investigator sites that interact directly with the patients and their caregivers. Were there any key learnings from this year's ESMO that directly impact the interaction of these groups?
So one of the strongest kind of elements around oncology drug development is the absolute need for everyone to focus on the patient's needs. The drug developer needs to think about that in the context of the trial design, the visit schedule. Physician, obviously, in terms of informing the patient and supporting them and their families through the study. And, as Fortrea, as an organization, making sure that we support the investigator, the patient and their needs as I described, and also work very closely with our sponsor to align with their needs and expectations. I think oncology is unique in that regard, that everyone has a very strong focus and unified alignment and making sure that firstly every patient should have access or the opportunity to participate in trials, and secondly that should be fully informed, and when a patient does commit to being involved in a trial, that actually we support their journey throughout that trial to make sure that they can spend as much time with their loved ones, with their families, but also contribute to what's a really important mission.
I think that innovation is not effortless and requires a lot of and strong collaboration among all stakeholders. And having those interactions with investigators, I think, are critical. We need to hear what's going on in their sites, what are the challenges, what are the difficulties, so people like ourselves, as CRO, can understand what we can do better to improve that experience. And on the other side, discussion as well with patients and their caregivers, what we can do better to ensure that the experience is positive and that they are willing to participate in clinical trials. So these interactions are easy when they happen face-to-face and not virtually, and events like ESMO help to get those alignments and in much more closer way to do that. So it's positive that we see eventually those meetings happening every year or every 6 months.
Sounds like this year's ESMO was really insightful. Now, as we all know, it all comes down to the patients. Has the patient voice become more of a force in clinical trial design and beyond?
Yes, I think that the fact that the patients are involved in trial designs is more frequently now. And I think that we all recognize that every cancer patient matters and is unique. So I think that this is something that we are seeing as a change. But in addition to that, and involved patient or caregivers on the design of the studies, I think it's important as well how these patient associations and organizations are engaging with agencies like regulatory or authorities to ensure that everyone has access to this new treatments. And I think that this is something that as well, it's very powerful and it's helping. And in addition to that, we are seeing as well that requirement of including patients of diversity, minority, population ethnicities, which I think it's very important and it's been forbidden for many years. So this is something that as well that we're seeing, and we are maybe as well open, to run clinical studies in different countries beyond the traditional ones. And as a CRO, we as well need to make that effort to engage on those type of meetings with sites and investigators from these diverse countries. So it's a very interesting times, and for sure, patients has a lot to say.
Yeah, Laura, the point you make there about thinking about the global nature of the trials that we run in the early phase space, and whether that's thinking about countries in Latin America or India and other countries in Asia Pac is so important. When I think about the patient voice, I actually think about two elements, though. I think about the influence that a patient's thoughts would have on the actual trial design itself, so the visit schedules, but then also in terms of the patient's reported outcomes as well, and thinking about the quality of life. And actually, I think patients can have a really strong voice in both, right? Thinking about the experience that they have on a study and what's important for them to be measured in terms of pain control, pain management, mobility, but also access to healthcare provision. And then on the flip side, in terms of trial design, thinking about the journey that a patient's on and balancing that journey and their commitment to the trial with the valuable time that they want to spend with their family. So for me, I think both are really important. And when I think of the patient's voice, one of the things that we're focused on doing is actually making sure that we capture that. So every patient that's involved in our trials, we want to make sure that we're able to garnish that feedback as well.
Getting back to ESMO, since both of you work on clinical trials day in and day out, what are some things that you heard at the conference that surprised you or will change some aspect of how you approach oncology trial design and execution?
Before ESMO this year, there's an initiative called the Optima program, which is driven by the FDA, and it's about optimizing access to new novel treatments for patients. And one of the things that it focuses on is leveraging real world data, so real world drug experience for cancer patients once a drug is accessible. And actually, there was a lot of discussion at ESMO about the quality of the data that's available from electronic medical records, and both the value and the limitations of that data interpretation. So I think my take home from that was that we really need to think as an industry about how do we link what we do in the traditional clinical trial setting with what happens in the real world. And so thinking about trial designs and technologies and solutions that allow us to capture that data, that information from a patient's participation in a trial, when the drug's in the pre-license experimental stage, and then continuing into the post-award space, the post-approval space. And one area in particular that's highly relevant is in the cell and gene therapy space, where actually long-term follow-up is a really important aspect. And there was a number of presentations at ESMO this year about that and thinking about long-term follow-up, which is obviously incredibly important for every single cancer patient and looking at endpoints. But in particular, for these advanced therapies, where actually, sometimes the profile of efficacy and maybe the safety is and the profile of safety is different. And that needs to be considered. So I think those were my considerations. What about yourself, Laura?
Of course, I always take home message about results on clinical studies. I think that I was surprised because in the recent years, we see that new agents, the biological agents are the ones that are changing how we treat cancer. But this year, there was a presentation on a phase 3 study for cervical cancer, which the only thing that they did is to use standard chemotherapy, but given in a different way. And it was the first study that showed an impact in overall survival. And these are very cheap drugs that can really easily implement it in in less developed countries. So, and I think that you could do it from tomorrow. So after the meeting, there was a lot of investigators saying, I'm going to start doing it, by tomorrow. So we don't need to wait for approval. So that was very nice to see that engagement. And then maybe some of the things that we've mentioned about the data and in particularly maybe the use of artificial intelligence. I think that there was a lot of discussions about how can we apply in a meaningful way the use of artificial intelligence and which are going to be the barriers and the challenges in terms of confidential data protection. And this is something that the regulators will need to probably watch out in a much more and quicker way because, the studies are there, data is there, but we need to be innovative and looking for those solutions to ensure that we can use quicker that data and those systems that we have and leverage all this knowledge to bring really drugs quicker into patients.
Well, thank you very much, Ken and Laura, for speaking with us today. We really appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you very much to you guys. It was a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
We look forward to learning more about Fortrea's work in oncology clinical trials. Thank you all for joining us for this Xtalks Spotlight feature. We hope you enjoyed the discussion.